Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the CFES Brilliant Pathways webinar series. This one's titled The New Reality of College and Career Readiness in 2020 and Beyond. Very excited about today's guest, Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman, who's taking the time to join us today while he has a few other things going on, like running for governor and running a major organic farm. He has supported CFES, our mission in terms of helping students from underserved areas become college and career ready, kind of realize their post-secondary aspirations. He spoke at our 2018 national conference in Burlington and was a crowd favorite there. And the timings, it's amazing how much has happened since then. COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, the world has shifted greatly since then. And one of the reasons we're excited to have Lieutenant Governor here is to kind of talk about Vermont and how he sees this nationally in terms of young people and what does it mean for them. There's a lot of anxiety in terms of going to college. What's their next move going to be? So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I am super pleased to be here, and that was a great conference to be at. I learned a lot. I felt really honored to be on the stage with, I think it was a superintendent and a principal and another person who had a lot of knowledge, and just the different educators in the room that had come up for the conference. I felt like such a wealth of not only knowledge was in the room, far beyond my knowledge and education. Mine is minimal, but also a wealth of inspiration and motivation, and just people in teaching and in education that really wanted to help get more kids, more young people opportunities that would really open up doors for the rest of their lives. And just being in that room with those amazing people, and Jon, for you to do the work you're doing in Brilliant Pathways, what a great thing. It's just, I can't touch it as far as what you do to really open doors for people. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah, we appreciate that. I think that day you actually were in your farmer garb early in the day and had to switch into your tie as you came on the stage. It was a good transition, but I think
it does happen that way.
Yeah, one of the fact that you've been in government a long time. I mean, you ran in college for a state seat, but you've also worked really hard as a farmer, and that I think that piece, as a owner of a business, and given that that's all happening now, you have a lot of employees you have to deal with. What are some of the things you're, telling them, but also young people during this just really tough time about the next move forward?
Wow. Well, on the farm, we were trying to figure out, the legislature was in session and I preside over the Senate. So in that side, we were trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we have remote hearings and continue the process of trying to govern and be there for people and address the issues that Vermonters are facing? And then on the farm, we were trying to figure out, what are the small business things you need to do, from masks to keeping clean and washing hands and keeping food safe, because we didn't know what the parameters were early on with food as a conveyor. And so it really was a matter of applying critical thinking skills, which is what I think is probably relevant to this conversation more than anything else, is looking at every situation and every moment of the day in how is what I'm doing impacting potentially someone else's health, potentially my own health, and on the farm side, how can the farm continue to operate in a way that could be profitable, because it's already such a marginal situation as it is, that if we add too many hurdles, just like any small business was trying to figure out, appropriate and necessary hurdles for public health, and yet what was the business impact? And as both the owners and employees, we were having these conversations every day in terms of, what do we do? How do we make it work better for you? How do we make it work better for us? Because running a small business, the owner and the employees are pretty much all in it together. And I think, as we saw in education, educators are trying to figure it out. For those that are watching that are in denser populated areas, I just don't even know how you handled it, because in dense apartment complexes and a stairway that's common for 80 people to be using, that in and alone is just another danger point for transmission. And I've often felt very lucky to be in Vermont, and particularly out on a farm where at least a lot of our work was outdoors. And we could say to crew, look, when you're weeding, make sure you're weeding, more than 6 or 8, 10 feet apart, and then you don't have to wear a mask and you can still be communicating. Whereas we used to maybe be right across from each other in a bed of lettuce mix and be 2 feet apart. It's like, okay, just work not across from each other, but across and down from each other. But it's really was about trying to figure out how to be thinking all the time. And thinking all the time is both exhausting, but it also starts to set up opportunities to see what could be done differently. And that, I think, is true in everyday life. It's true in education, to bring it back to sort of what your work is. And it takes practice to think a lot. It's a lot easier, and I enjoy not thinking. I enjoy sitting in front of a TV or a movie and just kind of absorbing what's coming at me. But if you practice your thinking in analyzing what's going on around you and really looking at what's happening in the workplace or in education and trying to take in information, those thinking, practicing skills are going to elevate one's ability to go to the next level and to really step up from being someone who's going to be always at the bottom to someone who might be able to get to the middle or even higher by being observant and taking in what's going on and then applying that knowledge with each thing that you do.
Yeah, that's good advice. It's your point earlier. It's interesting. Our schools across the country, like Texas, some of those are going to go all in person. We have some that are going to go, kind of a hybrid model, and the kids are kind of struggling to get their heads around it. But one of the pieces we're trying to talk to them about, a lot of students, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this. A lot of young people saying, I think I should defer. I don't feel like I should go to college, or I want to become a plumber and go to tech school, but I'm more, a lot of deferred dreams, perhaps. Do you have any thinking? And I know, we've talked about Vermont and the actually low number of students that go to college, given the high school graduation rate. What are you hearing and suggesting for students that are really like, what do I do next?
Wow, there is so much uncertainty right now. I would think long and hard. I would consider, what is that institution? Is it an institution where it's in a more remote setting, or where you could live on a campus? I mean, I think about some of the state colleges in Vermont and how small they are, and that if folks are thinking about higher education, are you thinking of going to a campus with 50,000 people or a campus with 600 people or 1,200 people? And how many of them are residential students that are living on campus or in that dense neighborhood? So I've actually thought, and this is certainly a little bit of a political answer, but as a Vermonter, our state colleges are quite small, with little campuses in small communities where the rates of COVID are lower. So maybe some of the thought process of deferring or not might be based on the circumstances of where you're considering going. And if you're considering going to a big institution or in a state that hasn't really got good policies that are diminishing the rates of infection, or good, it's not just state policies, it's really about the collective societal thought process. Are people taking care to, elbow the little automatic door openers so that nobody's hands touch those buttons and then not touch the handles of the doors? Are people wearing masks? You can start to analyze that around the country with searches on Google to see, where are people being conscious and what is the scale of that institution? And maybe that comfort level can be increased. Whereas, and I just have to quickly thank my daughter for getting me some water, maybe that plays into the decision of deferment or not. On the other hand, a lot of the folks that are maybe watching are from big urban areas. And so again, compare where you're going and where you are. And maybe that's a factor that goes into that decision. A lot of technical schools, if you're thinking about going on to be a plumber or an electrician, there may be more space because you're in a big room where you're doing mechanical work or moving bigger pieces of wood or machinery around, and maybe there's more airflow in those kinds of settings than in smaller classrooms. So back to the thinking part, I think it depends what you're going to do and what your current circumstances are relative to your choice, and to weigh those in terms of continuing on. Because we need, I mean, HVAC and plumbing jobs, I would think right now are through the roof, because schools need to have hands-free faucets and hands-free toilets so that people aren't all touching those same faucets. And all kinds of schools and buildings need much better air circulation systems and air exchange systems. And I think that's going to be the case for a couple of years. So those are good fields to go into.
Yeah. Yeah. It does seem like, the whole economy is shifting in ways where, we're not quite sure how it'll look yet, but
That's right.
we've talked about the 70 by 2025 initiative, now called Advance Vermont. The goal of getting 70% of Vermont residents either having a college degree, 2-year, or certificate of value, plumbing, any trade.
Trades.
Admirable goal. It's surprising to people that we have a 90% high school graduation rate, and yet one of the bottom 10 states for college attendance rates. Different reasons for that. But that goal, and it's impossible to talk about it without what's occurring now with COVID, but how do you feel like Vermont is doing with that goal in terms of, there's thousands of jobs projected to go unfilled in the next 10 years because we don't have enough educated individuals. And I'll let you run with this, but is it trying to keep more college students from UVM to stay here after? Do we bring in more? Do we educate our own workforce? How's that going? And
Sure.
Thinking, yeah.
Well, it's an incredibly admirable goal, and I think you've laid out those demographics quite starkly. I mean, Vermont is the oldest or the second oldest state in the country. We toggle back and forth, I think, with Maine, and New Hampshire's right up there with us. So we do have a lot of people retiring. So there's a lot of jobs that are going to be opening up. That's a signal to all of you from anywhere in the country. If you're looking to live in a rural area with a good, decent job, we need a lot of folks who are going to be in elder care, health care, plumbing and electrical jobs, general education as well. And I think what we need to look at, certainly in the Vermont scale, is making sure we keep our state colleges open. You mentioned UVM, and I know a lot of your focus is at UVM, and I appreciate that. And UVM at this point is about a third in-state students, and 2/3 folks from other states. And many do stay. I'm one of those. I came from the Boston area and fell in love with the area, fell in love with the culture and the people. Like every community, it has its problems. We have our challenges. We're one of the whitest states in the country, and there's a lot of reckoning with that right now going on in the political and the community conversations, just like there are all across the country. But at the same time, from an environment perspective, it's a pretty enriching place to live for those that love the outdoors or water and clean air and being able to see the sky. And our state colleges are really struggling, and the state needs to make sure we fund and keep them open, because I think if our state colleges close, the goal of 70 by 2025 is not going to happen. Period.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, those three. Yeah, Castleton, I think, has done a good job. We have a lot of students from the Adirondacks will go over there, and it's really but if any of those communities lost those schools, it would be, devastating. And to your point, students would have few choices and have to go out of state. So when you're you aren't able to campaign and go out like traditionally like you would as much, so it's you're a little more remotely done. What are the biggest issues you're hearing from people across the state, that the obstacles? And it's adults too, right? But young people wanting to figure out, how do I overcome these obstacles? And just I'm sure it's a wide range of what you hear, and it's probably COVID focused. But
yeah, I mean, right now a lot of things are COVID focused, but in terms of folks going on from high school to college, it's usually the expense. The bottom line is dollars. What are the hurdles money wise? There are private and even some state colleges all across the country and universities that are closing because they don't have enough students and enough enrollment. So I think in terms of, for those out there who are thinking about, maybe first generation, never been, the colleges and universities are wanted for students right now relative to the slots, but do they have the resources to make it possible for you to go? And I think that's the big challenge is the cost for, working people and struggling people to be able to go on to higher education, and then the ability for those higher education institutions to have enough resources to help support folks that need financial support to be able to go. And that's a decade-long challenge that's occurred from the federal level to both the state level as well. The federal supports for higher education have been shrinking as one might think it's a lot of money, but it's, a percentage or two of the whole US budget is around education compared to, 50% for military. So we need to be shifting those priorities. And one of the things that's exciting to me is young people are getting involved in the political process. And forget me for the moment and my running for office, that's moot in this regard. But I do think that the cost of college tuition, and the conversations Bernie and then Elizabeth Warren and now others are having around really making higher education financially accessible to people is really at the crux of the matter for most people. Because if you're in a household that is struggling economically and you're hearing there's really not enough money out there to support the opportunity at higher ed, then literally those decisions start being made when you're in third, fourth, fifth grade, that once I get done with high school, there is no hope beyond that. And that is what we really have to change, because if that's the mentality going all the way through, then one's not going to do that thinking I was talking about earlier with that same vigor. One's not going to be reaching for that next step to be, how do I achieve a little higher so that when I do get through 11th or 12th grade, I'm going to be one of those people that has an opportunity to take advantage of that education. So those are the things I hear about, is there's systemic problems that as a society we've developed over the last couple decades, and without either political and or financial shifts in our mindset, those are going to be the struggles. Yeah,
that's fascinating. I think and with COVID, I think a lot of those inequities have been amplified because you've got, the digital divide is we've known the issue for years, yet during COVID, and we've had schools where 30-40% of the kids, they aren't even logging on. Some of them can't, so we've had some schools drive buses with routers on them in the Adirondacks to another school, park it in a gas station, and cars drive up the kids with their parents so they can log on. They're doing homework in a parking lot till 11 at night.
Unbelievable.
So it's just, and it's so some of these things are, they've been around a while and we haven't addressed them. We've tried, and then this happens, and it just really has exemplified the issue. It's an unequal education. You've got kids who can afford internet and they're getting it, and then those other issues, sort of socioeconomic ones where it's difficult. They don't have support at home, so it's hard to log on and do those things. But what do you think about, with the digital divide and just and we have cities that have 100%. We have schools in cities 100%. They can log on, and still 20% don't for these other reasons that I'm talking about. But in Vermont and the Adirondacks, what are some? It's a huge. I realize the cost is immense, and it's probably a government and private sector issue coming together. But what do you want to do about that? What do you think we can do about it?
Well, yeah, there's a lot there, and I apologize. One of my farm crew just sent me a question, so I missed your last sentence. Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, no, it's just with the digital divide in general and inequities that have got. What would you do, and what can you do?
Yeah, I got it now, because I heard most of it. I just blanked at the end, and I apologize. Welcome to the juggle. So there's a lot to this. Not only do some of these families have no internet because they're in rural areas or they don't have the money to pay for it, but then even if you've got 2 or 3 kids, some places have copper wire, and if all 3 are trying to be on it at the same time learning with video conversations, they all come to a grinding halt. So only 1 kid could be on at a time. Well, that means the other kids don't get an education, or a household only has 1 screen. So what do you do when you got 1 screen and 3 kids? Who gets the priority? This is in the richest country in the world. This is absurd that that's the situation. And in Vermont, we have huge swaths of the state that still don't have decent broadband, that families don't have the resources. So I'm in a delicate balance here talking about politics, but we absolutely have to invest in our broadband infrastructure around the state. It's been talked about for a long time, but for the last couple of years, I've been talking about a Green Mountain New Deal, where we would take some of the Trump tax cuts from the top 5%, those that have accumulated insane amounts of wealth over the last 40 years, ever since all the tax rates keep dropping for the wealthiest, and say, you know what? It is time for the wealthiest in society to invest in the fundamental infrastructure of our economy and our education and our people. And if we were to take that 5% and take half of the tax cut they got from Trump, and that would be about $100 million a year, which for Vermont is a lot of money. And if we put $20 million a year for 4 or 5 years into stretching fiber into those rural areas and leveraging federal dollars and leveraging private dollars, we could really expand that broadband access so you don't have school buses driving Wi-Fi boosters to gas stations, or families driving out of the hills down to the school or nearby to sit in the parking lot trying to study while sitting in a car seat without a desk. This is such an embarrassment to our state and our whole country in terms of the inequity of academic opportunity, broadband from an economic perspective, for rural areas that are struggling while suburban areas are doing great, and urban areas are also challenged sometimes with this. So until we deal with the economic inequity issues, we're going to continue to have these kinds of infrastructure problems.
And on the potential positive side of that really difficult issue, with COVID, I mean, you're hearing things like, real estate's picking up a little bit in Vermont, people considering working more remotely. That's great, and that would be good to bring in others and move some things. But potentially also, if you've got people living in rural areas and we actually do close the digital divide, it could be an economic driver big time for Vermont. I mean, you could have people working remotely Boston, New York, they drive there every 2 weeks. I mean, educationally it's huge, but I mean, from an economic development standpoint?
Oh, I'm laughing because you basically just took words that I've been saying for the last 4 or 5 months, and they came right out of your mouth. I have said, if we boosted up our rural infrastructure, both from an affordable housing perspective in our village centers, as well as the broadband scenario, we would see just swaths of people moving here from Boston and New York, because especially Southern Vermont and also the Northeast Kingdom, because of good highway access, we're 2 to 4 hours from the major urban hubs. And if a young family could live and work in Vermont in a job that is primarily software based, and you said every 2 weeks, I used to say every sort of 4 to 6 weeks, you travel to Boston, spend 3 days and 2 nights, you meet with 8 or 10 clients, 2 or 3 a day for a few days, and you come home and you raise your kids in a rural, healthy setting, with good food, with open, fresh air, with clean water from your own well. That's, unlike some parts of the country with, contaminated wells. We even have some spots in Vermont with that, unfortunately. But for the most part, incredibly peaceful and safe opportunities. I think it would do tremendous for our state. And a lot of those jobs are $80,000, $120,000, $150,000 a year jobs, which is the kind of job we need. Some incomes in that range in Vermont. That upper middle income area is really a tough spot in Vermont to find those kinds of jobs. So I happen to think broadband expansion is something that's important for education, our economy, and now we're learning with COVID, you had started talking about COVID earlier, the issue of telemedicine and telehealth. Again, a lot of people couldn't get to their appointments during COVID. You couldn't see people face to face, and many people in Vermont had no access to healthcare because they didn't have broadband.
Yeah. And the job piece, it's interesting. One of our goals is to show all the students all the jobs that are out there. Like, they tend to think like nurse, doctor, teacher, they have this, but there's so many other jobs out there that they haven't even thought of, that we didn't even know were going to be, exist 2 years ago. And kind of showing them that those opportunities is something that we try and do. And in Vermont, do you think, with the expansion you just talked about, I'm assuming a lot of more jobs that we don't even have here yet would grow out of that?
Well, sure. There's a couple different pieces to this. If we, I think every state is looking at how do you jumpstart the economy when things have come to a grinding halt. And right now in Vermont, we have a lot of restaurants with outdoor seating. What's going to happen in late September and October when outdoor seating is no longer an option? But if we were to be running fiber cables all over the state, if we were building affordable and efficient housing in our village centers, if we were renovating the old housing stock of Vermont with weatherization, especially for seniors on fixed income or low income folks who don't have the money up front to do weatherization, but would actually then be able to save money monthly on their bills. All those jobs, every single one I just listed, are not even secondary degree kinds of jobs. If you have some electrician skills, you can run fiber optic cables with some training from the fiber companies. If you have some plumbing or HVAC skills or technical training skills, you could be involved in building houses and or those affordable houses in those village centers, or doing weatherization jobs. And are they great paying? No. But are they good paying and going to help you with making a living for a while? Yes. And then if we have built denser housing in our village centers, maybe there's some more jobs now in a coffee shop because you've got enough people to pay for there to be a coffee shop or a general store. Some of your viewers here are probably from massive urban areas that just don't even conceptualize that a small town might not even have a coffee shop or a general store. But in Vermont, those things don't exist in a lot of towns. But if we add 50 or 100 people that are going to live and work in the village, not commute out all day long, then you might have the opportunity for success. And then maybe you have a small bakery, and then you have a hardware store. Those things are critical for everyday living in a lot of parts of Vermont. Those are 20 and 40 miles away now.
Mm-hmm. When you look forward, okay, say, a couple of years, this is going to be a long process. We're going to feel the effects of this for, years. If you're talking to young people about looking ahead 2 or 3 years, would you have them change their plans at all? Or do you really feel like we're really encouraging them to forge ahead anyway with their dreams? It's not going to, I can't even fathom going to college as a first year student, and I have fond memories of it. They're not even going to meet people. They're going to start online virtually. So they're saying, why would I do this? Would you encourage them to, they had a dream before COVID. Do they readjust it, or do they stick with it and just go from there?
I think probably try to forge ahead. Right now we can sit and kind of go nowhere and try to wait it out. But why not take the opportunity to keep trying to better oneself, keep trying to prepare for whatever's coming next? And it is going to be really hard. It is almost as important to forge ahead in order to stay busy and keep your mind focused on something than it is to sit and focus on the fear and focus on the what ifs and what might happen. I was just sort of always raised as someone to be like, and what's next and what's next? And I get that that's not everybody's vein and everybody's upbringing or everybody's, individual soul and energy. But, unless forging ahead is going to put you in a particularly dangerous COVID situation, which, obviously you have to weigh that. But I think trying to move forward is still the best idea. I'll bring in a little metaphor. I was very lucky. I took a year off from college in 1991. I was very active on campus, but I wasn't really applying myself academically the way I should have been for the cost of an education. And I hiked the Appalachian Trail. And the Appalachian Trail is, 2,100 and somewhere between 40 and 65, 70 miles. No one really knows exactly, from Georgia all the way to Maine. And, that trail, you get to the very beginning and you're on the pre-trail up to the peak of a mountain in Georgia. I wish I could remember the name of it now, so many years ago. And you start with 1 foot and then the next. And you think, how am I ever going to hike 2,100 and whatever miles? And you say, well, just one step at a time. And, that's going to be the path for everyone who's viewing this webinar going forward. Your life is going to continue. And it's going to continue whether you're an active participant in that life and in the direction you want to take it, or circumstances around you are going to take you in another direction. And there's no doubt that the circumstances around you are going to impact how far you can go or whether you can go in a particular direction. But you can fight the headwinds. You can push in a new direction maybe with the wind to your side if it's not at your back, which at least pushes you slightly in the right direction while you're also buffeting it. But you gotta, I guess I gotta say, you gotta try. And I recognize that I'm in a white male privileged position to do that encouragement. And there are folks that have had to overcome much harder hurdles than me. So my words may sound hollow, and I can't offer more than my words and my actions. But I do think if there's anywhere in you that can say, I got to push forward, otherwise I'm going to go backwards. I think it's worth continuing to try to do that.
Yeah, that's inspirational. I appreciate that. You're right. Everybody has different circumstances and much harder than in some areas than others. But that's a good inspirational way to end, actually, because we're getting about close, and I know you have some farming campaigning to do. But is there anything else you'd like to touch on? I mean, that really, you've been a supporter of us, and we really appreciate it. We have a lot of the same goals and working together.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think education is the potential great equalizer in our society, or at least more of an equalizer. I think politics and taxation and wealth distribution are part of it too. But ultimately, I think it's critical that we get out there and fight for educational opportunities for folks, that having teachers that are inspiring, having opportunities to learn in an inspiring way is really kind of the potential for a path forward for folks who are coming from really difficult circumstances. And, I wish you the best with the work you're doing, and Jon, and all of the work at Brilliant Pathways, because I do think it's really a fantastic program.
We appreciate it. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, to elevate to a next level, a young person in education, all forms of it, 2-4 year technical. We've seen it changed a ton of lives, and it's inspirational. So thanks for taking the time today, and good luck with everything. You got a lot coming ahead.
Absolutely. You bet. Thanks, Jon.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.